Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to examine the absolutely fascinating and honestly sometimes totally baffling clash between the strict, unyielding order of the justice system and the absolute most bizarre behaviors ever caught on courtroom cameras. We're looking at what happens when sheer human defiance meets the absolute authority of the gavel.
All right, let's just dive right into our 4 categories of chaos for today. Sovereigns and syntax, unprofessional professionals, stunts and defiance, and finally, bizarre final statements.
But hey, before we meet our agents of chaos, we really have to lay down the ground rules. The concept of contempt of court is the ultimate trump card in the legal system. Violating the rules of a judge's courtroom brings swift, severe, and immediate consequences. You can literally lose your liberty on the spot if you disrespect the judicial branch, and as we're about to see, some folks willingly walk right into that trap.
Kicking things off with Category 1, sovereigns and syntax. We're talking about defendants who attempt to use magic words and completely fake legal structures to try and beat the system. Many of these individuals align with the sovereign citizens movement, basically claiming the court simply has zero jurisdiction over them.
Just listen to this quote because it brilliantly illustrates the strategy. This is a defendant in Hawaii named William Dennis. He was in court for a super simple charge of driving with a suspended license, but when the judge asked him his name, he responded with this endless string of hyphenated nonsense. The absolute craziest part? The judge actually dismissed his case with prejudice, which means it was completely thrown out. But Dennis refused to accept the win and just kept arguing with the judge, throwing out even more hyphens until a bailiff literally had to physically escort him to a seat.
Now, what's really interesting here is the extreme contrast in consequences when this goes wrong. Take the case of Keisha Johnson. She was facing a minor possession charge that would have just been a $185 fine. That's it. But instead of just paying it, she refused to stand at the podium, demanded the judge prove jurisdiction, and ended up disrupting the court so badly that she was immediately taken down by officers and thrown in jail for contempt of court. She literally turned a minor fine into immediate jail time just to make a point that completely backfired.
So it's one thing for a frustrated defendant to act out or fall down a rabbit hole of fake legal jargon. But we really have to ask, what happens when the actual officers of the court themselves decide to just toss the rulebook out the window?
Well, that brings us to Category 2, unprofessional professionals. Let's examine the shocking actions of actual licensed lawyers who definitely should know better, but decided to risk their entire careers anyway.
The crucial takeaway here is that professional immunity simply doesn't exist for attorneys. Look at Michelle McDonald, an attorney in a child custody hearing who openly defied the judge, illegally photographed the courtroom, and then flat out refused to give her information to deputies. She ended up getting arrested, handcuffed to a wheelchair, and literally wheeled back to her client's table. Both she and Dennis Haver, who we are going to talk about in just a second, had their law licenses indefinitely suspended or were completely disbarred for their stunts.
Okay, so attorney Dennis Haver actually stood before the court and stated he was there dressed as Thomas Jefferson. I am not kidding. He literally wore a powdered wig, an 18th century suit, and white stockings to the Kansas Supreme Court. And why? To argue his own professional competency in a capital murder case. He had previously defended a man facing the death penalty and inexplicably admitted to the jury that his client was a criminal for a living. When the state moved to disbar him for severe incompetence, he somehow thought dressing up as a founding father would save his career. Unsurprisingly, the Supreme Court swiftly disagreed and took his license.
Leaving the professionals behind, we are now stepping into the realm of pure, unadulterated physical disruption. Category 3, stunt, fort, and defiance. This is where defendants completely abandon logic for theatrical rebellion. Picture this. 20-year-old Spencer Boston is at a routine arraignment for speeding and marijuana possession. Out of nowhere, he boldly declares that we the people deserve better because marijuana is a very harmless drug. He then reaches right into his pocket, pulls out a joint, and literally lights up directly in front of the judge. And his grand prize for that specific stunt? An instant 10 additional days in jail for contempt of court. Completely avoidable, on top of a brand new disorderly conduct charge. The joint, of course, was promptly collected as evidence.
Now, sometimes the chaos doesn't just happen in a flash, it drags on for weeks. Look at the tragic case of Darrell Brooks, who drove a car through a Christmas parade, killing 6 people. During his trial, he acted as his own lawyer, and his behavior was just relentlessly disrespectful. He fell asleep for 40 minutes during testimony,
When the judge eventually moved him to an adjacent room, he removed his clothing. He even built a miniature fort out of his legal cardboard boxes just to hide from the camera. The jury, of course, saw right through all of it and found him guilty on all 76 charges.
Or how about Titus Colbert? Instead of defending himself against 3 counts of premeditated attempted murder against police officers, which, by the way, carried a potential 105-year prison sentence, he decided to use his arraignment to repeatedly sing about secret societies, shouting dates related to the origins of the Illuminati.
The judge kept telling him to keep his mouth shut, but Colbert just kept singing. Well, reality eventually hit. After years of psychiatric evaluations to prove he was actually competent to stand trial, he finally abandoned the conspiracy theories, pleaded guilty, and was hit with a solid 20 years in state prison.
All right, this brings us to our final category. We've seen the stunts and the fake syntax, but what happens at the very end of the line? Category 4 examines the incredibly strange sentencing statements of those who are completely out of options but somehow still refuse to read the room. Let's talk about Alex Brown. He violated his DWI probation twice by drinking alcohol, pushing his blood alcohol level to twice the legal limit. The state recommended a super lenient 10 additional days in jail. But instead of just taking the deal and apologizing, Brown tries to haggle with the judge. He asked for 5 days, offering to pay a $500 fine like he was bargaining at a flea market. The judge quickly delivered a cold-hearted dose of reality, stating, "This is not a negotiation." Brown went to jail that very same day.
But honestly, perhaps the most jarring final words ever recorded came from Tex McIver. He was a 75-year-old former attorney convicted of felony murder for shooting his own wife. Facing a life sentence, he was given the floor to speak before the judge handed down his fate. And what did he talk about for 15 solid minutes? He rambled about race horses in Australia, his godson's favorite basketball team, Chick-fil-A, and this deep connection to his late wife that he literally described as telepathy.
He touched on almost everything in the world except the actual crime, and the judge was utterly unimpressed. Amidst all the bizarre tangents about fast food and telepathy, the judge pointed out one absolutely glaring omission. McIver never once actually apologized for taking his wife's life. He was promptly sentenced to life in prison.
So, what is the ultimate takeaway from all this wild source material we've explored today? It brings us right to our conclusion. The gavel always wins.
Whether we're talking about sovereign citizens demanding jurisdiction, defendants lighting up illicit substances right at the podium, or seasoned lawyers dressing up as founding fathers, the legal system simply does not care. It has a zero-tolerance policy for disruption. The rules of the courtroom are not suggestions, and the gavel always has the final say. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to chew on. We've seen people turn minor fines into instant jail time and risk their entire lifelong careers for a brief moment of theatrical rebellion. When faced with the absolute unyielding authority of the justice system, why is human nature so deeply tempted to choose chaos over simple compliance? It's a fascinating quirk of the human mind, and clearly one that judges will be dealing with for a very long time. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this provided a clearer, highly structured picture of just how wild the courtroom can truly get.